I'm Matt Hamer. I'm a sort of a young entomologist. I'm very interested in ants. I've been interested in ants for a very long time, since we were quite young. But only in the last about 5-6 years, I've started becoming more inclined into the more professional entomology field. So I've mounted lots and lots of ants recently over the past few years, and I've developed a technique that I want to show everyone today on how to mount these ants neatly and accurately. But currently I'm in Hong Kong, so that's why I'm not with you today presenting. So the time difference is very large. I think it's about 7 hours. But I'm here in the Insect Biodiversity and Biogeography Lab, researching exotic ants and other insects in Hong Kong. So yeah, that's me. So I'll get on with my presentation. So I think we all know why we prepare specimens, but I'll run through it very quickly. So preparing specimens allows accurate identifications rather than just from photographs alone. So you can rely on morphology and morphometrics, and morphometrics are measurements of specimens. This makes highly reliable record data in both time and space. You're also able to generate your own reference collection like you have here. So this is actually one of my ant collection, one of my boxes. I think it's my member signs. And if your collection is kept well, away from mold and pests, it's potentially timeless. I've seen specimens in the Naturalist Museum in London, almost 200 years old. So yeah, very brief reason why we prepare specimens. But today I'm talking about point mounting, which is a very specific preparation method for ants and other insects as well. You can see here there's some flies and beetles. There's also card mounting, but I'm not going into that today. Ants, some people do mount ants with cards, like the one on the image on the very far right. But I don't. I normally mount ants with point mounts. So the point mounts are these tiny bits of card. Specimens are glued to this very pointed piece of card. A pin is put through the opposite side to the specimen. And this displays laterally the morphological features really quite well. You can look at the head, you can look at the dorsally. The only problem is you can't see the other side too well because the pin is in the way. But generally, the features are the same each side, more often the case. And also, they're very easy to manipulate. You've got a handle for your pin, and you can easily see what you're doing. Yes. So the equipment I use, card points, I cut them out myself from card. Ideally, you want to use archival cards, so acid-free. Here I'm using some black card. Glue, so here I'm using some white emulsion glue. Ideally, this has to be water soluble, which makes life a lot easier if you make mistakes. I use pins, so here I've got some 4s, but generally I use size 2s or 3s. So you want a foam board as well, so you can see this big white foam board in the middle. Toilet roll, kitchen roll, something to absorb ethanol. A stage, so you can see this cork block up here. I have a better stage now, but this is what I was using prior. Microscope, it's very useful, very handy to use a microscope for your preparation. Light is so key actually, especially the smaller specimens. If you don't have enough light, it becomes an absolute pain. You can't see what you're doing. And you also need specimens and lots of time. Tweezers and forceps are also very useful. Yeah. So preservation first, just gonna quickly go over this. So generally I use ethanol at 70%. There's various different types of ethanol. They all pretty much do the same thing. 70% is normally really good for ants and other Hymenoptera, but many ants. You can also store some specimens in vinegar. I've had some very good also success with using vinegar 5%, which is bog standard malt white vinegar from your local shop. And this is really good for making your specimens very manipulative, as in the body parts are very easy to move about, and they can be easily moved and staged very well. Ideally, you want to have a nice screwed cap, so no evaporation. In the left-hand tube, you can see there's a little black ring. That's an O-ring that helps to stop evaporation. And you want plenty of preservatives, so it's all the way up to the top. So the very second step, actually, for mounting your specimens in the way I do it. So you get your kitchen roll and you dry your specimens. Take the specimen out and dry it on the tissue roll. Kitchen roll, whatever any absorptive material will do. I normally leave them for about 5 minutes or so. That's normally enough. Bigger the specimen, the longer you probably want to leave it. So this is probably one really key step in my method is anchoring. So I use this sort of X anchor system where I drive a pin through either side of the top and bottom of the specimen. So the specimen's lying laterally on this side. And this holds the specimen in place. You can relatively easily move the body parts around. And it stops the specimen from moving across your foam piece once you put it on. Normally 2 or 3 pins are required. So you can see here I've used an X-like anchoring position here in the images. So step 4, you want to position the gaster and the petiole. So the gaster is the very last segment where the abdomen is. And you want to make sure that these are all on the horizontal line. You don't want the gaster moved down underneath. You want it very nicely positioned so that you can see all your features very well and nothing's obscured by legs and various other parts. Some very critical characters are on the petiole, especially in some groups in the UK, such as ponera and hyperponera. Yeah, that's that. So all your legs are positioned down below. Here, as you can see, all the hind legs are positioned down below. None of the legs are obscuring the abdomen, the gaster, or the petiole, or any other part of the body. Yeah, so you can do that with the hind legs and the forelimbs. You also want to do the same thing with the antennae. So the antennae aren't clumped together. Sometimes the ethanol, if it hasn't dried properly, or the vinegar hasn't dried properly, the scapes are touching each other and they stick together. You want to separate those out. There's some very key characters on scapes, especially in Lasius and Mimica. And I normally leave this for about an hour. Sometimes to a day. It depends on how many specimens I'm mounting at the same time. But generally, the longer you keep it, the less manipulative the limbs will be. They're more rigid and brittle they'll become. So you kind of want to hit a sweet spot, and it kind of depends on the size of your specimen as well. The smaller the specimen, the probably the faster it's going to become brittle. The larger, the more time you have. It's kind of, you have to find a sweet spot. I just want to talk about wings here. So this is an alate ant. I want to ensure that the wings are away from the body, pointing upwards ideally, or just backwards, or somewhere away from the body so that you can see the lateral side of the body. And ideally so that the forewing and the hind wing are separated, so they're connected up. But you can get away with not doing that sometimes. So if you're doing lots and lots of specimens, you end up having this kind of array of lots and lots of pins sticking out of a foam board, and all your specimens waiting to be mounted, and they're all drying together. So gluing. So this is probably another very key point in the process. So ideally, the less glue, the better. This is also something. It's size dependent. The bigger the specimen, the more glue you want to use. You want to aim for the hind pair of coxa. So you can see here, I'm slowly moving the pin and the point into the onto the hind coxa. I use tweezers normally, and I often use my microscope for this stage because it can be very precise, especially with very small specimens. But there's two methods. You can also come in with your forceps without the pin, and it's kind of up to you at this point. But your specimen should be dry and relatively easy to do, easy to slowly move on to this point. So this is it's very hard to explain this without demonstrating it completely, but yeah. So you want to be slow and steady. Sometimes I make mistakes. So here you can see that the point is glued very far away from the hind coxa, so it's not exactly right, and this will cause balance problems. So the more the body is it's unweighted essentially, so it's more likely to fall off. And ideally you want to, so you can see here it's not right, basically it's not positioned correctly. But so here I put the specimen back into some water and took it out again, dried it off, did the same process again, and then came back and mounted it better, and placed the specimen onto the hind coxa. But this is all very slow and steady process. The more you do, the faster you get. So after you've done that, you can move you can pin your data labels onto your specimens. So I use my pinning block. So you have different stages for your specimens. Here you want to put your location labels on. You want to put your specimens accession number here. So example, my accession number for my collection is MTHN. This is actually a beetle specimen, but the same principle. And you want to put your determination label on here. Yeah, and so they're all at different stages. It's up to you which way you want to put your labels, but yeah, I normally put my accession label at the top. So once you've done that, you've mastered the process. There's lots of little tips and tricks I've figured out whilst going through this process and learning how to do this myself. So once you've got a semi-dried specimen on your point, you can leave it for about a day or so, and you can come back and slowly manipulate the limbs so that they're positioned better. As they dry, the limbs will become more responsive to your movements, so you can get a very small forcep and tiny push the legs down very carefully, very slowly, so that it doesn't fall off the pin or the point. Sorry. You can also use a pin, a very fine pin, to do this with. You slowly nudge the legs down, so you reveal the parts of the body. You can also hang the point off the edge once it's drying, up on the top image here, so that the limbs are hanging down, but they're not being impacted by the foam. So they're off the side. I normally have, when I'm doing this with lots of specimens, I normally have lots and lots of specimens all lined up or got on the edge of these foam boards, all ready to be put into my pinning block and positioned. The sharper I found that the sharper the point, the better. Sometimes, so I've started to cut my own points now with scissors. This allows a more precise gluing onto the coxa. If they're very broad and bulky, it's very difficult to get accurate mounting and get it positioned properly. The smaller specimens, the finer your drying pins. So yeah, the pins you're using to manipulate the specimen when it's going to dry on your foam board, the finer the pins it's a lot easier to use. So if you're using thicker, it's quite obvious really. If you're using thicker pins, it's going to be a lot harder for smaller specimens. Always keep your labels with your specimens, something I always tell students here. So otherwise you lose your data, and always use water soluble glue, so that if you make mistakes, you can come back and fix it. Some frequently occurring problems I found with this method is that some people use way too much glue. This is the only example I could find where somebody's used too much glue. You can't really see a lot of the features here. I couldn't find any other images. I guess nobody wants to photograph messed up specimens with glue all over the place. So Sometimes if you're using very tiny amounts of glue, it's rapidly drying, especially in a very warm environment like I am here in Hong Kong. It can dry very quickly, so you have to do your process very fast, but precise. And that's a very hard balance to get. If you're using way too high percentage ethanol, I didn't mention this before, but if your ethanol is above 90%, your specimens will be brittle. Your ant specimens will be brittle, and that becomes very annoying when you're trying to manipulate your specimens and make sure that the limbs are in the right positions. So that kind of feeds into the next point of unresponsive specimens. Specimens that the limbs aren't responding properly, and it doesn't work, and things aren't moving properly. And also very small specimens are very difficult. But with all of this, these problems can be kind of remedied with various tips I've put before. But practice makes perfect. You've got to just mount hundreds and hundreds of ants and keep going and keep going. And even now, I still make mistakes all the time. But if you're using water-soluble glue, and you can use different type of preservative, potentially vinegar, you can get around these mistakes, and you can work with it. So these are the two specimens I showed earlier while I was mounting, so Stigmatoma and Boranopone, I think. But here they are mounted up, imaged for you to see. So the point is on the Kindcoxer, wings are up, the limbs are down and out the way. That's it. If there are any questions, do let me know. There's my email address, my website, and Twitter handle as well. Here are some good sites for points and pins. Whatdon, NHPS, Bioequip, and Entosfix. Whatdon does a very nice glue. I prefer to this white emulsion glue I'm using at the moment, but I'm not endorsed by anything. I'm just recommending. And that's it. That's my talk done. Thank you very much.